My name is Belinda Clark, and I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement for Medill. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you, faculty, staff, students, and alumni who have joined us this evening. Each year, the Medill Alumni Office likes to host a Women in Marketing event, sort of in honor of kicking off International Women's Month. And this year, I am privileged to welcome rock star Kristin Barbour, who I have a long history with as a friend and a colleague. But even better, she and our faculty member, Neil Golden, also have a history and a very successful business one at that. So before I hand it off to Neil to do a fun introduction of Kristin, and then she'll launch into her program, I wanted to remind everybody we have a Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. So if you have questions for Kristin during the presentation, please just submit your questions through the Q&A. The chat will be disabled, but you can just click on Q&A and submit your questions. Thanks again for coming, and take it away, Neil.
Well, thank you, Belinda. It's great to be with the whole Northwestern community tonight, and it's my honor to be able to introduce Kristin Barbour. Just for a little bit of background, the obvious stuff. Kristin's currently the managing director and a partner at Camp & King here in Chicago. She's a veteran within the advertising and marketing community now for more than 25 years, and she's worked with some of the most prestigious brands in the entire world, including McDonald's for well over a decade, as well as Kraft, Mars, ConAgra, and Chevrolet. Now, Kristin joined Camp & King in 2017 to launch and lead the agency's Chicago office. But I'd like to share a little bit more before all that, because that to me is arguably the most important and foundational. Kristin is known, certainly from her work with McDonald's and others. She is known for developing deep client partnerships. She's an innovative brand builder. She assembles incredible teams. And more than anything else, she has a great track record of driving real results for the businesses of the clients that she has served. And she's done that consistently throughout her career. Now, I mentioned McDonald's because that's where I had the experience with Kristin. I can say this, that Kristin helped drive the results at McDonald's that ultimately resulted in more than 50 consecutive months of positive growth for McDonald's as a key member of the DDB senior leadership team. Now she pioneered, and this is during her tenure, she pioneered a big part of the McDonald's back to basics turnaround plan, you know, celebrating Big Macs, celebrating Chicken McNuggets, Happy Meals, etc. And she was involved in launching the I'm Lovin' It campaign, which is the longest running global campaign in McDonald's history. Now, what is probably a little bit less obvious is DDB has been a partner with McDonald's, or had been a partner for just ages. And for a short period of time, they lost that lead status to another very prominent, well-regarded agency, Leo Burnett. And then shortly after Kristin joined the team, she was part of the team at DDB that led the pitch that won back the McDonald's business as essentially the lead agency for the brand in 1997. My experience with Kristin is she is thoughtful, she's prepared, she's courageous, certainly is willing to come up with a point of view that is needed, and has the courage and conviction to be able to articulate it. She's versatile because she's worked at all facets of the business. And to most people, matter of fact, I couldn't find one that wouldn't say this. Not only is she a great colleague, but she's a friend. And on a personal note, for me, she stayed with the McDonald's business until the middle part of 2007. Somehow or another, she must have had a hunch that I was going to become the CMO later that year. So she was smart enough to get off that business and work on another piece of DDB's business for another one of his clients. But she set the foundation for a great relationship between McDonald's and DDB while I was in the lead role. But interestingly enough, I also reached out to a few colleagues and friends before tonight, and I just wanted to get their perspectives on Kristin. And here's some of the things that they said. She can make anything out of nothing. And this is both a business observation, but also it's a nod to her incredible cooking ability. because she is just a fantastic chef. Another one of her colleagues said, there's one word that defines Kristin, and that is charisma. She's got an infectious personality. She's a servant leader. And if there's another word that I would use to describe her, this is what the other person said, was supportive. A third person made this observation that, you have to have a special place in your heart for being a parent of only daughters, and that's exactly what Kristin is. And of course, being a parent of 4 kids myself, 3 of them were daughters. I can attest to that. But the last point is she's a proud University of Michigan alum. And I just want to let you know that in my judgment, speaking tonight is just a bit of the penance that she had to not be part of the Northwestern community until tonight. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Kristin. Kristin, take it away, and I know you're going to wow them.
Neil, thank you so much. One of the things that I'm going to talk about is that more often than not, great advertising is really the outcome of having amazing clients. And I had an amazing time with you as my client, and we made some great work together under the Golden Arches. So thank you so much. I am so happy to be here, guys, with you tonight. It's Women's History Month. The month of March kicks it off, and we're approaching International Women's Day. And as a female agency leader and a mother of 3 girls, I'm really thrilled to be part of this. Somebody who has survived and thrived in an industry that many describe as ruthless and thankless. So I do have a few secrets to share with you tonight, and hopefully you'll agree they're worth sharing. So with all the luck in the world, I'm going to share my screen on Zoom, so hang tight. 1 second. There we go. Okay, great. So we'll start with just a comment. People ask me, how the heck do you stay sane in this industry? What keeps you driven to do great work? And I have one answer for them. It's the people. It's the people who really are the magic behind the business. I like to say they're the pixie dust of our industry. And really, human connection is the thread that is the magic behind advertising. And that's the theme that I'd love to talk to you guys about tonight. First, I have a deep connection to the very special people that I work with. An ad agency is not a typical business environment. In order for creativity to thrive, you need a culture where people can have that space to really show up. And as a result, the people that I work with are some of the most passionate and authentic people that I know. Then there's the connection that the work actually has, which is connecting brands and people. And I've learned over the years that this is just as much about connecting with people's hearts as it is people's wallets. And last but not least, it's connection to our clients, because great work has everything to do with the connection that we forge with our clients. Because when there is trust and there is true partnership, that's when we can unlock the power of creativity to be one of the most powerful forces in business. Bill Bernbach, he was one of the grandfathers of advertising. He said this, he put all of his creative arrogance aside and said that great advertising is more often the result of great clients than of great agencies. And I learned this. I learned this as a young account executive. And what I learned is that having great clients isn't something that just gets bestowed upon you. It's something you earn. This is what a classic quote from Dick Rogers, who was a CEO of DDB at the time, back when we were trying to get the McDonald's business back to us, back home at DDB from Leo Burnett. He'd pull us into a conference room And he'd say to us, if they don't like you and they don't trust you and they don't respect you, don't bother pulling your boards out of the bag. And yes, ads used to be on boards. This was before all of our technology. So I wanted to share with you one of the greatest examples in my career of how a client can trust an agency. And it's when I ran the Conagra Foods account for DDB Chicago. The global CMO came up to me and she said, Kristin, I feel like my team is holding you guys back from doing your best work. They are phenomenal general managers. They all have their MBAs. They're running really tight ships with their business. But I just don't feel that they understand what makes great creative. And I don't think that they're giving you the best feedback to get to the best work. Can you help me? And yes, we answered the call. So what I'm going to show you to kick things off tonight are a couple of the tools that we presented to help train the global marketing organization as to how to give great feedback to get to great work. The first thing that we did was get very up close and personal with what not to do. And we did this by taking 3 Hall of Fame iconic advertising campaigns that almost never made it out in the world. And the reason why they almost died is because of feedback that was shared when the agency first presented the idea. So we're going to start with a campaign that you guys may know. It's for Bud Light. It's called Real Men of Genius, and it's the longest running, most successful radio campaign of all time. Let's take a listen.
Bud Light presents Real Men of Genius.
Real men of genius.
Today we salute you, Mr. Tiny Thong Bikini Wearer.
Mr. Tiny Thong Bikini Wearer.
Beachgoers the world over see you coming and say, hey, check out the woolly mammoth in the rubber band.
A giant woolly mammoth.
Defying the natural laws of physics, you managed to squeeze a 46-inch waist into a 30-inch suit. Like ground meat crammed into a sausage skin, you take to the beach and proudly strut your stuff.
Yeah!
If you've got it, flaunt it. That's your motto, which is ironic because you haven't got it. So crack open an ice cold Bud Light, sweet cheeks, and know that if you weren't wearing that suit, we'd ask you to take a bow.
Mr. Tiny Thong Bikini Wearer.
Bud Light Beer, Anheuser-Busch, St. Louis, Missouri.
So the story you need to know about this campaign when it was first presented is that the brand manager for Bud Light received the CD, because at the time it was laid down on a CD. He took the CD after he heard it. He opened the sunroof of his car and he threw it out the window. He called the agency and said, you guys, are you kidding me? I hate it. We're not doing this, and just shut it down immediately. But despite this initial reaction, the agency believed so strongly in the idea that they actually made an investment on their own, and they produced samples of the spots. They hired Pete Stackert, who was a professional voiceover, and they even had music performed by the 80s pop band, Survivor. It was the lead singer, Dave Bickler, and they laid down a produced spot and they sent it back over to the client. And once the client heard this more polished version of the creative, he started to warm up to it. And so they agreed that they would run Real Men of Genius in a couple of test markets. Well, you can only imagine what happened. The test markets blew up success for the brand. They ended up launching the campaign nationally. The campaign won an Emmy. They produced over 230 spots, and Bud Light became the #1 beer in the world. And so really the lesson here is that you can't shut an idea down. Creative ideas are fragile. They need to be nurtured. And thanks to the persistence and the tenacity on the part of both the client and the agency, one of the most successful campaigns in radio history was able to stay alive. The next example I'd like to share with you is MasterCard. And this campaign launched 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. And MasterCard was in a position where it really needed to establish brand distinctiveness vis-a-vis Amex and Visa. And so they called for a global pitch, a global advertising pitch. The one rule that the client said up front in the process was, whatever the winning idea is, it has to test the highest in quantitative testing. This is the idea that they ended up going with, and I'll tell you a story about it after.
2 tickets, $46. 2 hot dogs, 2 popcorns, 2 sodas, $27. 1 autographed baseball, $50. Real conversation with 11-year-old son, priceless. There are some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's MasterCard. Accepted at ballparks coast to coast.
Okay, so the story with the Priceless campaign is that it tested the absolute worst out of all the ideas in the pitch. But despite this fact, the CMO believed so much in the idea. He was captivated by how powerful the emotional insight was. He knew it was a big idea, and he understood that allowing MasterCard to be associated with paying for the things and the moments that are really mattered to people would be huge for the brand. And what's also so interesting about his position is that he realized that this was such a powerful emotional truth that it really is a truth and an insight that was true for the credit card category at large. But MasterCard is the brand that had the courage to stand up and own that insight. Even though it didn't test well, he knew it was a big idea. He trusted his gut. And so the rule here is, when you're looking at creative, you need to not necessarily think of it as a science, because creativity is all about connection. And a lot of times that has to do with a human truth that doesn't easily fit in a box or get backed up by science or data. The last example I'll show you is for Dos Equis beer. And at the time, this launched in 2006. At the time, it was primarily a regional beer in California and Texas, so they really needed to drive mass appeal so that they could expand their distribution and get in the ring with the bigger brands. Their target was young adults, and the clients during the briefing asked the agency to really focus on the Mexican cues of the brand that could trigger its heritage and drive brand-linked associations. However, despite this direction, the agency came back and brought forward an interesting insight that led to their creative idea, which was this. For young adults, more than anything else, they wanted to be seen as interesting by their friends. Let's take a look at the idea.
In a past life, he was himself. If opportunity knocks and he's not home, opportunity waits. He gave his father the talk. He is the most interesting man in the world.
I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis. Stay thirsty, my friends.
So what's interesting about this campaign is that the shoot to make this work for the very first time was nearly called off. And the reason was the client felt so strongly that the most interesting man in the spot needed to be casted as sort of a young, hip, young adult, because that's who they were trying to target. And they really felt like they needed to be more literally reflective of the target audience. The agency sat at the table with the client, rolled their sleeves up, and really tried to work with the client to open their minds on this one. And finally, the client gave in and agreed to the agency's recommendation to cast Jonathan Goldsmith, who's essentially the absurdly debonair James Bond meets Hemingway character. And the logic was that the target of young men would not see him as a threat or a reminder of accomplishments they hadn't achieved yet. He needed to be someone to work towards rather than a mirror of themselves. And the client agreed. The client finally agreed. And thank goodness they did, because it was this character that conveyed that insight and ultimately drove amazing success for the brand. What was once just a regional brand became the #6 imported beer in the country. The campaign ran for 12 years. And the lesson here is you don't need to be a mirror or hold a mirror up to your target audience. You need to be a lighthouse for your consumer. So the next piece I'm going to play for you, we use this in the training module, and it's very raw, it's very rough, but our idea was to go around the agency and get our agency teammates to just look at the camera and tell very honest stories on client feedback, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And here's what we put together.
I had this great client on the Pepsi account who always felt that when he saw creative, he equated it to Christmas morning. He got so excited about seeing creative that he felt like it was Christmas morning. So he was always incredibly appreciative with the work. So we always started out really thanking the agency, and we understood how much time we spent and thought we put into it. So it was always really starting out with being really appreciative, which just made the agency feel really good. And he would look at the range of ideas, and his barometer for great work is if he felt a little bit uncomfortable. If he felt the work was really safe, he said, you haven't done your job. He's like, I'm comfortable with the uncomfortable, so make me feel a little uncomfortable, then I'll know that we have work that has the chance to really break through and get noticed. So we always loved that, and we always did great work on Pepsi. So I think being comfortable with the uncomfortable is a great way to look at work.
When we're done presenting work and we get absolutely no feedback at all. No feedback is 100 times worse than hearing bad things about your work. I think a lot of times people are afraid to offend creatives, that we might start crying. We don't really like to cry in front of others, so you can make us cry, we'll go back, but we'll just do the work again. But a lot of times when we don't hear anything, it just is we know that we're going to just hear a bunch of bad stuff through some other people. So I wish the communication would be there from the beginning a lot of times.
I think one of the things that happens a lot is you get the pecked to death by ducks syndrome. So the worst ad I ever did, or was one of the first ones that I did here at DGB. It was a really simple thing. It was for dessert bakes for banquet, 5-minute desserts, and the whole thing was like your desserts faster. So the idea was basically grandma, and she had an apron on, but the apron had racing flames. Very simple idea. She was in her kitchen. And then there was a question, we can't really see the dessert bake, it's in the background. Can we make the font bigger? Racing flames are a little bit subtle. Maybe we need to go something more obvious. Maybe we could put like a helmet on grandma. Grandma's, it's not really aspirational enough. She doesn't really represent our target. Can we make her more like our target, make her a little bit younger? The 5 minutes isn't coming through enough. What if we put a 5-minute on her apron? And at some point, I think everybody kind of involved just kind of threw up their hands and said, all right, just do whatever anybody asks. And so this is what ended up being produced. I don't know if you can see this on there. So we have this woman who looks like she has had some cranial damage or something. So she's wearing this crazy crash helmet, giant dessert bakes here. What was a piece of copy, dessert fans start your ovens, is now the worst headline ever. A giant product. Number 5 here, and what looks like a racing scarf or some sort of red flag blowing in the background. Somebody tore this out of a magazine and asked me to sign it. One of the art directors in the building. But that's my, pecked to death by ducks story. It's kind of hard because any of those little things on their own is not a big deal, but when you combine them all together, it's kind of a disaster.
Another thing I think would be the thoughtfulness of the feedback. So oftentimes clients will give the what and instead of the why. And so whether it's big or small things, whether it's nitpicking or something large about it, you'll get I don't like this, I tend to lean towards this direction versus the other if you're showing multiple executions. But you get a lot more of the what they don't like about it, a particular person, a style, how the prose is laid out, how the narrative is architected, as opposed to the why, which for me is much more important. Is it something that they feel like doesn't capture the right tone of the brand? Is it something that doesn't capture the bigness of a certain idea? Does it not properly set up a product or a service depending on what you're trying to market in the story? All tethering back to the brief. So I think focusing that feedback on the why as opposed to the what and the rationale would be really important.
Usually in the rough cut, we started out by saying, like, color is not there, it's not mixed, it's a scratch track, or it's the editor's assistant doing the voiceover, and we give all these caveats before we show the spot, and then we'll play the spot, and then we'll get comments like, I don't like that voiceover, that music is too loud, the picture's too dark, I can't see the product. I don't know why we give you caveats then. What's the point of the caveats?
The best client meetings I have ever been in have been where everyone is engaged and people are not afraid to laugh. This goes both ways, and I think that if we can kind of break the ice and break the tension and make people feel good and feel comfortable, they're more willing to accept what not only accept what we're showing them, but also be engaged to provide feedback as well. So I think having the ability to laugh at jokes is a really good thing, and sometimes it feels like we walk into meetings and it is as if I were to show The Hangover to this group of people, they would not even laugh, which I think is so weird. Everyone's human. So I think the worst creative meetings are the ones where crickets are chirping. The best are when people are interacting and laughing and having a good time.
Go with your gut. You can just love what you're watching and what's being presented to you. And if that's the case, just let us know. Just you can be very positive, and that always sets the tone. Like, lead with what you like and what you love.
So this video was probably one of the most effective tools that we used in our training. And there were many hands that went up afterwards and said, oh my gosh, I think I do all these things when I give you guys feedback, the good and the bad. So it was an incredibly effective way to kind of broker the conversation. So I'm gonna end with 3 more takeaways of recent work that we've done at my agency, Camp and King, to unleash brands to do great work. And the first is for UGG. And the principle here is understand consumer predisposition. An audience is predisposed to what you offer. When an audience is predisposed to what you offer, it's easier to engage and motivate them into action. So with UGG, they hired us to launch their first ever men's campaign. Very few men at the time knew UGG even made men's shoes, not to mention they viewed it a lot like Victoria's Secret for women's feet. So we needed to earn their respect. And we thought slippers, which they could, wear in a very no risk way in the privacy of their own home, would be a good bridge to bring men into the brand. So one of the things that we found as we were looking for an insight to connect with men is that this fun fact that 75% of men report thinking about nothing a few times a day. Yes, you heard it here first. They think about nothing a few times a day. 52% of men felt joyful thinking about nothing. So we ran with this insight and we positioned UGG slippers as the ultimate way to upgrade your downtime. And we leaned into the greatest quarterback of all time and the dude to garner the respect of men and show them how they could kick their feet up proper.
Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight? Come out tonight, come out tonight. Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight? And we'll dance by the light of the moon. Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight? Come out tonight, come out tonight. Buffalo gals, won't you?
We actually executed a full 360 integrated campaign around this notion of do nothing. The brand actually sponsored, for instance, penalty plays at the NHL games, and we branded the penalty boxes with UGG do nothing messaging. It was great work. It increased conversations about the brand by 81%, and it increased men's sales by 20%. Next key principle to talk about here is with our client PRANA, and PRANA is a smaller yoga wear brand that competes with Lululemon, Athleta, some of the bigger players, and they are very much a purpose-driven brand. The principle here is living your purpose can translate to lasting brand value. You know, they're a smaller fighter brand, but they stand for an incredibly noble purpose that is super relevant to their target audience. And it's all around a mission of promoting and serving positive personal change. So with very little budget, we had to make this purpose-driven message heard, and we weren't able to do it with a big, expensive advertising production. So instead, we created an invitation for consumers to actually engage and participate in the brand's mission and do it in a way that was relevant to their own life.
My job is a graphic designer, and I don't love my job.
I'm a frustrated high school science teacher.
I'm currently hiding in the maternity room of my day job.
The average American changed careers 5 times in life.
Stuck in an office when I want to be outdoors.
Currently been diagnosed with burnout.
On my drive home from work, I had a panic attack.
So I spend all day crunching numbers, which is the opposite of me.
My dream is to become a sports broadcaster.
I want to be a speaker for mental health. I want to direct the people
My name is QUEENA Bergen. This is me. I am a software engineer. My day job is sitting behind a screen. It is routine. So for all my techies, I guess you can say I have been programmed to execute those commands perfectly. I'd quit my job and travel the country with only one thought resting in the back of my conscience: to bring motivation, inspiration, and poetry to the forefront of any conversation, from Franklin to Riverdale, from public schools to prison cells, from open mics and late night traffic to the Congress halls or college campus. I want to help people believe.
And what we love about the results of that campaign is their mission was heard. And so much so that Nordstrom actually asked to be a key distributor, key retailer after that campaign was launched. Okay, great. All right, so guys, just wanted to leave you with this last sentiment. I think Keith Reinhardt summed up the thematic of what we've talked about today. You know, he mentions that with all the changes in technology, you know, there's been talk of, do we need to redefine advertising? And I love what he underscores here, that advertising has always been about connecting brands with people, and it still is. So amen to that. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I will hand it over to Belinda, who will help moderate questions.
Kristin, thank you so much. And I have to say, of course, maybe I've just been in my house too long, but that PRANA commercial, I was sobbing and I had to step away and get a cup of water, which I think is indicative of just the power that these, you know, that these spots can have. And, you know, we think of advertising and we get geared up for the Super Bowl and it's a big deal. But at the end of the day, to your point, it's about the people. And I think the best campaigns, as you guys have proven, really harness the emotions and the people themselves. So we do have a few questions, so I'll stop talking. I will ask the first one here. The first question is, back to the MasterCard campaign. Any theories why the Priceless campaign tested the worst? How can we best evaluate ideas so we don't miss the successes, but reduce the odds of choosing an idea we love that ends up performing poorly?
It's a great question. My guess is it was probably questions that were geared towards brand association. And at the time, you know, this would be the first time in establishing MasterCard being associated with this powerful truth. So that connection didn't exist yet. There also were no real product benefits that were super rational that were in that campaign. So it probably had to do with some of those things, but I think at the end of the day, the way to achieve success is to ensure that you're delivering on both sides of the equation. We call it brand magnetism, which is exactly what Priceless did for the brand. It gave the brand that sort of emotional power that you can't quite put your finger on, but you also need to have product integrity. And that's more of the rational sort of benefits of the product or service. So for MasterCard, they had to be distinctive and they had to do it in a way that was going to create an immediate connection with people. But as the campaign went on, it was a way and an umbrella that allowed them to pulse different messages that were more on the product integrity, rational side of the equation. So ultimately you need both. But chances are, if you're a brand that has to create distinctiveness in a category where everyone is sort of viewed the same, brand magnetism usually wins.
All right, second question. This is from a recent graduate of the IMC program. I'm a recent IMC grad and interested in working at an agency, but I'm a little scared off by the horror stories of the stress of agency life. As you well know, you've experienced it. What would you tell someone like me who's heard stories of the lack of work-life balance and boundaries? Good question.
Well, I think the pandemic has helped that situation because we naturally achieve more of a balance. And I think not just advertising, but companies in general understand the tangible value that comes from giving employees more of a work-life balance. So I think you have that going on your side. I'll also say that, you know, an agency culture that's a really good one and a healthy and vibrant one wants to feed its talent. And by feeding its talent, I mean providing ways to create that balance because, you know, everyone wants to have a life. So if the only thing that you're doing is spending 24/7 in the office, you're not going to get the best talent. So I do think, you know, there's always going to be those crazy times in the pitches and, you know, being up till 3 a.m. But I think it is heading in the right direction. Don't give up on advertising.
Well, and to give up on it when you see great work like that. I can't just stress it enough. It's just so fun to see the creativity, and the Tom Brady thing was hilarious. What advice would you give to students who would like to launch a career in advertising?
Get some experience, work for free, go bang on some doors, become an intern, get hands-on experience. I think also to enter your work into programs where you can get real clients critiquing your work. You know, there are programs out there. I think the key is, you know, moving from the academic world to actually putting your ideas into the world and understanding how to make those connections between creativity, solving a business problem. And the best way to do that is not studying it necessarily in a textbook. You've got to go out there and get the experience.
Excellent. This one regarding, and this fits nicely because we have a lot of IMC students. As you know, Medill's IMC program blends the science of data with the art of creativity to create the best brand communications. Can you share some additional examples of how you use data to find those insights to create the messages?
I mean, I will say that pretty much every campaign that we do, we use some form of data. And if it's not data that's first party data from the client, we often just do our own social listening, you know, and that kind of ties back to the UGG example of really, you know, finding out what your consumers' predispositions are so that they'll be more open to your invitation. So when in doubt, there is always data out there in terms of what consumers are talking about. Even if it's not your brand, it could be the category or, you know, the competitors. So doing that listening is always a great first step.
Good. And back to you. How did you know this was a career you wanted to pursue, and how did you break into the business?
So as Neil pointed out, I went to the University of Michigan. At the time, there was no advertising major there. I took a class my senior year that was called Writing for Advertising. And it was like 30 people. It was given by this woman who was an executive creative director of a small shop in Ann Arbor. It was an award-winning shop. They did a ton of work for the big three in Detroit. And I was obsessed with this class. I wanted to just work on coming up with ideas all the time. I wish it was like my entire schedule. And so after the class ended, I said to her, I really think you need an intern at your agency in Ann Arbor. And I think that should be me. So I can do anything. I can bring people coffee. I can be a fly on the wall. I can do research. And she's like, okay, be at my office at 8:30 on Monday morning. And I just, you know, did this internship before people did internships. And I saw how an agency worked and I loved everything about it. And I just have been obsessed ever since.
What was your first job after college in that field? Like, how did you get your first job? Because I think it was in Detroit, right?
Yep. Having that internship my senior year really helped because it was not a great time for the economy when I graduated. And I ended up getting a really great entry-level opportunity at Campbell Ewald to work on the national Chevy business. So it was a great piece of business, you know, right out of school to be able to just really sink my teeth into every single medium, because at the time General Motors, you know, their media budgets were bananas and we got to kind of touch everything. So that was my first job out of school.
Great. And how is social media influencing advertising in more traditional formats? Like you talked a lot about, you know, even the Shaq example where he was doing sort of the social media bomb. Yeah, how does that factor into TV, print? How do they work all together?
Social media is incredibly powerful. I mean, not only as just a source for data, but also a source for cultural relevance. I mean, it played a huge role in the Shaquille work before we even made any of those spots. And what we found was people were going on Shaquille's social channels and basically condemning him for being part of Papa John's. They just, you know, so we knew we had a problem that we had to turn around the perception that Shaquille is actually a credible agent of change, of positive change for the company. He wasn't there to be a corporate shill. But we only knew that we had to flip that switch because of what people were saying on his social channels. So we knew that we had to, some of the first communications out there, and actually the first thing we did before any television was that social video of him in the boardroom meeting, going around, you know, showing the new products that were happening, which is exactly what they do in board meetings. And I'm not kidding, it was 2 weeks after that got pushed out, not only on his channels that he posted, but on paid social, that the sentiment around Shaquille's role with Papa John's started to shift for the better. So that's an example of the power of social.
Well, and this fits nicely because sort of going back to ethics, someone says, considering so many institutions have borrowed from Edward Bernays' principles of advertising and PR for the past 100 years, how do advertisers today balance ethics with profit in the ads they present?
You know, it's a great question. I think, you know, part of this too is the agency needs to have a set of ethics that they abide by, and that will help guide the clients that they choose. You know, I feel very grateful that I work for an agency that's run independently, and, you know, as a partner of the agency, we all sit together at the table and make the decision as to whether or not, you know, this client and their proposition is something that falls within our own code of ethics. So I think it's a two-way street. It's not just our clients, but it's also the agencies holding themselves accountable.
Well, and this is a good one too, dovetailing on that. How can the ad business be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive of underrepresented communities?
I think it just has to start with the talent. I mean, we need to hold ourselves responsible and accountable for ensuring that the minority is the majority. I mean, it's as simple as that. And I think, you know, we're definitely making strides as an industry, but we're nowhere near where we should be.
And another question, would you ever consider moving to the client side? Why or why not?
Oh my gosh, I get that question a lot. You know what? I don't think so. I think the only time that I might consider that is when I like really hang it up and decide to do something completely different, as opposed to jump over to the client side. I just, you know, I started my presentation with talking about the people, and I just can't imagine the environment that I get to work in every day and the kind of people that I get to work with every day being replicated on the client side. I just can't. So it's what feeds me and keeps me coming back, no matter how painful it can be sometimes, but it really is the people that make it all worth it.
And I think we have time for two more. What qualities do you look for when you're hiring?
Well, it depends on the position, but I can say that passion is a huge one. Passion is so important in this business. My first boss told me, if you can imagine yourself doing anything else, then you shouldn't be in advertising. And maybe that's a little bit extreme, but it is true. I think we're looking for very hungry people who are relentlessly committed to doing great work and working as a team. It is not a one-man band at all. It is very much a team sport. Being able to collaborate and feed and build on ideas is really critical. And also being able to step outside of our role in terms of coming up with a creative solution and being able to truly walk in your client's shoes, get under the hood of their business, understand their challenges, and have real empathy for it. Because if you can do that, which is how we worked with McDonald's back in the day when Neil was there, if you can do that, then there will be trust. And when there is trust, you're going to be able to unlock incredible ideas together.
Good. And I think one more, this is a good one. What advice would you give to creatives who've worked in similar fields but are interested in switching to advertising? Have you seen anyone do this successfully, and what did they do to get there?
I think that it's definitely possible. I think, you know, depending on what creative field you've come from, I think it's more about being able to demonstrate and express how you can translate your role as a creator and an idea person, and be able to really talk about how that translates into an agency environment and what an agency does. So I would say, do your homework, you know, go sit and meet folks who work at agencies, have them give you a really rich picture of what's required as an agency creative, and then you'll be able to sort of build that bridge for people when you sit down and interview.
Good advice. And I think that's perfect timing. And I want to thank Neil from IMC for joining us this evening and giving such a lovely homage to Kristin. And it's just so fun to see that you guys have, you know, truly enjoyed working together and continue to be friends. And, you know, I think that just speaks well of, well, you guys, but also just, you know, the power of loving what you do. I mean, at the end of the day, if you love what you do, you're never bored. So obviously you both have loved what you've done. And Kristin, I've watched you grow in this career since we were like 22 years old. And the stuff that you've done and the stories that you tell over like ladies' nights are just epic. So I look forward to doing that again soon. But meantime, just a quick pitch to the viewers out there. You know, we're doing a lot of these virtual webinars, and thanks to Stacy and Matt for hanging in there and helping us put this all together as always. If you go to the Medill website, and there's the Medill Centennial site, you will see everything and anything that we're doing. It's a big year for us. Medill turned 100 a few short weeks ago, and we have a whole year of activities planned. So make sure you keep tabs on our events. And I thank you all for coming, and especially thank you, Kristin, and thank you, Neil. It's been great.
Thank you, guys.